Hi, I'm Jeff Snedeker, the horn teacher at Central Washington University in Ellensburg, Washington. This video is to offer you some tips and hopefully helpful hints as part of your audition for the All-State Honor Groups for the 2018 Washington Music Educators Association Conference in February of 2018 in Yakima. This particular video is about track number 4, the excerpt from the third movement of Franz Strauss's Horn Concerto, Opus 8. Franz Strauss is a pretty interesting character in the history of the horn. He was a wonderful performer. He was part of, who spent most of his performing career in Munich, Germany, as part of the opera orchestra there. And he wound up performing and even premiering some of the works of Richard Wagner, whose operas have marvelous, marvelous horn parts. Franz Strauss is also well known as the father of Richard Strauss, who himself wrote a couple of really terrific horn concertos and several other pieces that feature the horn, and some really pretty terrific horn parts in his orchestral music as well. Strauss's concerto, this particular one, the Opus 8, is a standard work for high school, college, and even professional horn players in concert, and has 3 pretty interesting movements. The first movement opens kind of mysteriously, ends with a big flourish. The second movement is very, very song-like, very cantabile, a beautiful, beautiful melody. The third movement takes a moment to revisit the first movement a little bit, the mysterious stuff, and then finishes with this wonderful flourish from which this particular excerpt is taken. As we look at the excerpt itself, we'll notice, first of all, that the tempo marking is animato, an animated, sort of lively tempo, and the metronome marking at quarter note equals 100 to 120 seems kind of innocent, and maybe even, you know, not that challenging, but in context with all of the 16th notes that we have in this passage, it's actually a pretty wide range and offers some trapdoors that we can fall into if we're not careful. But I'll talk about tempo in just a minute. As with any of these excerpts, we're going to want to prepare them to present them with accurate pitches, accurate rhythms, accurate articulations as they are indicated, and accurate dynamics as notated. When it comes to rhythm, probably the most important little tricky spots for this particular excerpt are in the ties that we find. For example, if you look in measure 103, you'll notice that on beat 3 we have a tied quarter note to a 16th note. That's a nice little trapdoor we can fall into that would cause us to rush ahead to beat 4. Same thing happens in the next measure on beat 1, where we have these ties. We want to make sure that we count them very carefully. However, the ties that are even more potentially problematic happen in 109, 110, 111, and 112, where we have a half note tied to a dotted 8th note. This is definitely sort of ripe for the temptation to rush. So make sure you count those rhythms very, very carefully as you proceed, and give the length of time or the duration that they are notated with. In terms of articulation, we have a lot of sort of predictable stuff, a lot of slur to, tongue to, which is something that we're used to as horn players or wind players in general. There are a couple of tricky spots. For example, in the very first measure, measure 100, we have a slur from the first 8th note to the first 16th note, which again looks innocent enough, but it's actually kind of tricky, and it's one of those details that we can gloss over very easily and fall into a T ta 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 when it's really T ya ta 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 like that. So make sure that you're paying a close attention to that. That is one of those details that the people listening to your audition recordings will pick up on. The other little tricky spot, articulation-wise, is in measure 104. If you look at beat 4, you'll notice that the slur to, tongue to pattern that we've gotten used to is all of a sudden switched, and we have tongue to, slur to. Again, a detail that the people listening to your recording will pick up on, and so be careful in your preparation to do that. The other question, of course, is about breathing. It's very tempting with fast excerpts to take a big breath and just kind of plow ahead till you run out of air. But there are several good spots to breathe. For example, you could breathe in measure 102 after the quarter note on beat 2. You could breathe in measure 105 after the quarter note on beat 1. Same for measure 106. You could breathe after the quarter note on beat 1. In measure 107, you could breathe between the half notes. In measure 109, you could breathe on the tie, but don't rush. You could make the same case in, say, measure 112, where you breathe after the tie, such that you have a nice full tank of air to play through the next 4 measures or so with some authority, which would be good. And then you could certainly breathe after the quarter note on the downbeat of measure 116, which will certainly give you enough air to make it, again, with authority, to the end of the movement. Now, don't breathe in all of those places. Just breathe in some of those places so that you have a sense of pacing and so forth that allows you to have a full tank of air the whole time, but still have a sense of some good musical pacing. Now, speaking of musical pacing, you'll notice that we don't have a whole lot of dynamics involved here. So when that happens, we don't want to play everything boring and flat, worrying so much about the, what are they going to think if I put a dynamic in there? Well, actually, the people listening probably want to hear some kind of phrasing. So you can do some nice phrasing by following, say, the melodic contour. So in other words, as it goes higher, get a little more intense. As it descends, maybe come down a little bit. But I think the way to approach this whole excerpt is to think of it in terms of a long, steady build with ups and downs from the beginning to the end. So perhaps we start maybe around mezzo piano or something like that, and then we gradually build with some nice phrasing as we go to arrive in measure 116 at forte with some power and some a sense of resolution, so that we play it out to the end with a nice sort of animated and definitely a good resolution to the end of this entire concerto. Let's see. The only other technical thing that we encounter here is the trill that we find in measure 114. And you can do this trill a couple of different ways. You could use your fingers, and you could trill from the printed A upwards to the printed B. By the way, all trills are essentially to be trilled upwards, okay? And there are some exceptions, but not normally. So you're going to trill from the printed A to a note a step above within the key signature. So if we look at our key signature, what we see is 1 sharp, which has no bearing on the step above the written A. So trill from A to B natural. Please don't trill to B flat. B flat is not part of the key signature. It's not part of the key that we're playing here. And so make your trill relevant to the piece. A to B natural. Okay? And then, so do it with your fingers. Or if you're confident in being able to do a lip trill, where you just move back and forth between the notes with your lips only, then I recommend that you use just 1 and 2 on your F side, so no thumb valve involved, and trill upwards from A to B natural again. Make sure you give yourself time to do the little termination, those 2 little grace notes at the end of the measure that lead very nicely as pickup notes into the next downbeat, the accented E, and that, of course, takes us onward to our resolution at forte in measure 116. So let's see. I think that's about it. Make sure that as you're preparing this, spend a lot of time practicing G major scales. There's a lot of that in here. Yeah, we've got a couple of sharps that throw us off, but for the most part it's G major. So if you're really comfortable with your G major finger patterns, you'll be in good shape. So then it comes down to performing it. And that's where we return to the idea of tempo. If we look at the low end of the tempo recommendation there, 100. That's pretty reasonable, I think, to do. If we move up to the fast end, 120, and we try that, I don't know, the person that chooses that tempo, I think is being pretty optimistic. Because, well, let me put it this way. There's a difference between fast and rushed. There is nothing fast about rushed. When you play something and it's rushed, it's simply too fast. And that doesn't help anybody. It's not really all that exciting, to be honest, although I'm sure it feels that way. To play something fast means that we are under control. Okay? Fast, not rushed. So pick a tempo somewhere in the range that's comfortable. And so for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right down the middle, 110. Okay, good. I like that. I think I can manage that without sounding rushed. I admit it's got a couple of spots here where the fingers are a little tricky, so we'll see how we do with that. But anyway, my goal is to produce a solid sound, a full sound through the whole thing, but yet at the same time, I want to find a balance between power and agility. I want to make sure that everything is as clean as it can possibly be. Okay, so let's see. I think I've got everything emptied out now. Let's take a little check. Yep, I think we're good. Okay, check the tempo one more time. All right, here we go. Okay, so there you have it. That's track number 4, an excerpt from Franz Strauss's Horn Concerto, Opus 8. Good luck on your auditions. If you have any questions about anything related to this excerpt or perhaps the horn in general, please feel free to contact me at the email address or the telephone number that will magically be appearing at the bottom of the screen. Take care and good luck on your auditions.